Hello, this is Maggio at Studio Anabami in Santa Cruz with the podcast Marking into the Paradigm. This podcast reveals how we mark the world and are marked by the world, both figuratively and literally. As a somatic art practice, it begins to change our relationship to perceptions of the reality that we have inherited. The practice guides us through creative process marking approaches to revise our relationship to ourselves and the world. And I know that sounds pretty radical, but give me a moment. And also we've seen it happen in the last 5 years with a group of not small people, but a small group of people. On the north edge of Monterey Bay and California coast, Studio Anabami sits in an old industrial building from the 1920s. It is a center for classes and workshops and retreats, utilizing visual arts format to explore reality. As director of the center, I use practice in being as inspiration for a unique approach to mixed media through first awareness of the paradigm of reality that we have, and then the incremental shifting of how we perceive. Inside the studio, the tin corrugated roof is 30 feet high. It rattles in the wind like it's going to peel off. And although we're only a mile from the ocean, there is a constant buzz of industrial sounds around us. Our canvas or substrate that we often work on is from a roll of black industrial paper tacked on the wall. Because we are experimenting with noticing and shifting paradigms, rather than the flat surface, we refer to this substrate as a window or portal, as a space we could step into. We will mark with acrylic paint, water-based implements, and add layers of thin paper that have been marked on. Marking is fundamental to the visual arts, but also a metaphor for engaging the world, the animate and the inanimate. Inanimate like ideas, emotions, mysteries, all with their own life force and intelligence. Marking is giving as well as receiving. Gestures that leave their residue are marks. The fulcrum that we cultivate to direct the marks is embodied awareness. Rupert Spira, an Oxford-based spiritual teacher and writer, uses this metaphor when talking about transcendence. He says that it's like the setup for a joke. We have no idea where the story's going until the punchline, when it all connects. We let the story evolve through mutual agreement. The punchline is new terrain, which, like a joke, to explain it, you lose the impact. The discipline is to move from a visually dominant perspective centered in the mental into the senses. We meet the world, acknowledging a fundamental intelligence that offers more creative choices with leaps of insight. In my current process, I am using sheets of tissue paper previously marked with monoprints, textures, asemic writing, patterns, stencils, which I laminate with cold wax, and that's the setup for the joke. As I work, I'm not sure where it's going. The joke setting up metaphor is apt for this marking process. We have no goal in marking, but we have an intention. We have no strategy for control, but open for collaborative with the materials as part of the relational field. In over 50 years in the visual arts, this art practice recently has changed my work radically. It is not just another phase of abstract or figurative work or a change of materials. This approach that I am introducing to you is so different from anything that I've done that it's sometimes hard to make heads or tails of the outcome, which seems to be part of the practice. By accessing embodied imagination, I have come to a new understanding of the art practice, leading me to an unconsidered experience in the ground of being. With time, this art practice has begun to rewire habitual circuitry, opening to a familiar, yet at the same time uncomfortable place. I say uncomfortable because it fundamentally challenges, then alters identity. The quantum physicist David Bohm hypothesizes that there is an underlying order to life that cannot be known directly. He calls this the implicate order, or the ground of being. We are intimate with this ground of being, yet, as he says, it is not discernible until it unfolds. What if, however, this unfolding order is masked by what we have been programmed to perceive? What if our consensus reality has created a separation, fragmentation of our relationship to perceive this reality? How do we come to more fully appreciate and engage in the exploration of this revealing order? For the last 5 years in the studio, participants have worked to consider how to engage this unfoldment. And you would think that the arts, as the aesthetic creative mode of knowing the world, would help to reveal and discard these masks. But it has become a part of the commodity itself, taken hostage by the economic machinery. Which reminds me of doing brush calligraphy in the public schools with a kindergarten class. No one expected this population to grasp this ancient power of being that is reflected in the discipline from a totally different culture. But this class was amazing, and I think it was basically because of the teacher. We did horizontal strokes for the calligraphy, for the character of the Chinese, number 1, on newspaper, one after the other, holding the brush, pausing, lifting at the right place, and then we went to good paper. Because I wanted to avoid judgment of good or bad, I asked everyone to pick one of theirs that sang to put in front of the classroom. They knew exactly what I meant. And then when we looked at them all together, there was one in particular that had a power to it. Everyone agreed. But when I returned it to the owner, his comment was, "Well, if this is so good, how much money can I get for it?" So here we have a 6-year-old who already finds value measured by the marketplace. And yet there are still cultures on the planet that reflect an understanding of how the arts can nurture the ground of being. During my immersion in several apprenticeships in Japan, the various traditional arts demonstrated how art practice in being can reveal that underlying order. It may not be articulatable in words, but it presents a reality of wholeness that you can perceive. Here at Anavami Studio, we have entered into our own discovery process, marking into the paradigm as an art practice to cultivate a new relationship with materials, with image making, with the world, and therefore with the self. This practice renders the perception of a new reality, a shift in consciousness, and ultimately a new identity. Incrementally, we have learned to tolerate more confusion and frustration while building skills to hold dichotomy and not knowing with more grace. What initially feels like accident through meaningful synchronicity gives view to a larger container. In this art practice, you begin to feel that you are moving from sole agent to collaborative participant in the studio and out. To change our relationship to materials and creative process changes the egocentricity of us as center to being immersed in a greater whole. In this process, we allow real to begin to change. Marking into the paradigm entertains various realities through the embodiment of the imaginal realm, causing reflection on and deconstruction of entrenched assumptions. Historically, social paradigms shift slowly in the evolution of consciousness as new information gains momentum. We can only aid the collective shift by beginning with ourselves, and we know that it's time. So look for more podcasts on the subject of marking into the paradigm. There are painting classes and retreats through anavamicenter.com. And I want to thank Jimmy Jackson for the music.